So 10 years, can you remember 10 years ago we decided to do a tarot deck, and one of the things that I wanted to do was just reintroduce what our intention was, why this is perhaps a little bit different to some of the other decks that are out there, and perhaps also explain why it's taken 10 years to do. And also what you'll get out of it as a deck itself, what I hope that people will get out of it. I do think it is a slightly different deck, and I was thinking just recently that each deck tends to have its own timeline, of course. When we did the Secret Dawn deck, which was also with art by Janine Hall, and from a discovery that Derek Bain made in the Freemasonry Library, the Grand Lodge in London, this didn't take too long to actually do, and it went through very quickly, the actual design and planning and the production of it and so forth. But this deck has taken 10 years. And when I was thinking about it, if you think about the Waite-Smith deck, that took 5 months. That took 5 months to do. And that was 78 images. But they were, you know, Pamela Coleman-Smith could execute them very quickly. When we think about the Thoth Tarot, the Frida Harris, Aleister Crowley Tarot, that took 5 years, and that was 78 cards. And when we come to take a look in a moment at the Waite-Trinick Tarot, Waite's second tarot deck, that took 5 years as well, and that was only 22 cards, or 22 images, because they weren't really designed as cards. So this deck has taken 10 years, and we originally planned 3 decks in 12 years. So we've still got 2 years to complete our other 2 decks and still sort of hit our schedule. But if we think about it, that is 6 months per card. So it's 22 major arcana cards. And if you think about it, it's only 6 months per card. So if you spend 6 months working on a card, working on the research, the design, going backwards and forwards with design ideas, really refining it, and then the art being executed as on a large canvas in oils with multiple glazes, unlike a lot of the modern technology for producing computer graphics. That isn't too bad. 1 card every 6 months means that it's 10 years. It's 10 years to do 20 cards, 22 cards. So thank you for the congratulations. It has been a long time coming. Where this project started was actually 10 years ago. Before we discovered Waite's second tarot deck, or second tarot images, called the Waite-Trinick images, because he did them with a stained glass artist who was a member of his Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, the FRC. They had designed images for ritual use in their secret order. Now, these images have remained secret for 100 years, literally a century. These images have been hidden. Well, they've been used within the order. The order has carried on. The order has carried on to this day from Waite's original formation of it in London. And a chance eBay search, just randomly one day, someone was selling what they called the Waite-Trinick cards. Now, these are the actual cards I bought off eBay, and it turned out it was a photographer who was obviously a member of the order, had left the order, but had made himself a set of the images, photographed them, and then very, not too bad laminated job just to make these cards. And so I bought them and was just astonished at what they were, because some of the cards, some of the images had been published in the Decaduma and De Paulis book, Occult Tarot, some sort of 10 years before, 15 years before. And it turned out in later research that a few collectors had got images of about 4 of the cards. And they used to swap these 4 card images around, saying this is Waite's secret deck, and so on, between themselves. And maybe about 3 people had seen it outside of the order before I sort of came across these. And then I was working with Tali Goodwin and on one of our books, and we were discussing this. And then a few days later, I think it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, Tali messaged me and said, are these those cards? And she'd found a link in the British Museum to something called the Great Symbols of the Paths under a magical motto. And that was the breakthrough, because they'd been given to the British Museum about 30 years before by Waite's estate, and they've been catalogued under Trinick's magical name, Donick Attingham. And so Tolly had gone researching for Donick Attingham in the archives and had found something called the Great Symbols of the Paths. That turned out to be the book with Trinick's original artwork in it and Waite's notes for this secret deck. And it's a very unusual set of images in the fact that this card, for example, that might look like the Hierophant, is actually for Darth, one of the non-Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. So Waite originally intended for them to have the illustrations of the Sephiroth of the Tree of Life, as well as different versions of the cards. So if we take a look at the version of the Moon card here, you can see that's quite a classical version of the Moon with the tower and the dogs and so forth. But then there are more sublime images, particularly like the Blasted Tower and the Empress. So they're very sublime. They're very, what's the word, abstract. But some of them are not so abstract, like the High Priestess, for example, where we see an almost certain equivalent of a drawing down of the moon. And these were produced originally between 1917 and 1923, so long before Gerald Gardner. And here we see a figure drawing down the lunar currents by the shoreline from the High Priestess with the big lunar crescent above her. Now, this is not so much drawing down the moon as drawing down or contacting the Shekinah, the presence of the divine on earth, often represented in a feminine form in Kabbalah, and particularly as the Shekinah, or the living presence of the divine. And here the figure is drawing that essence down. So Tolly and I did research. We paid, I think we did a sort of fundraiser and got enough money to pay the British Museum to photograph the images, and then we released that as this book, Abiding in the Sanctuary, where we had a lot of the background information about Trinick and Pippet, one of the other artists involved briefly, and Waite, including, if we can find it here, so here's a picture of Trinick, so that's J.B. Trinick, and here we go. And here's a picture of the people involved in the sort of esoteric circles of the time, and here is Arthur Edward Waite. You can see Mr. Waite is just here in amongst all of the members of the SRIA, the Society Rosicruciana in Anglia, but he also had his own group called the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross. And so we published in this several of the images in the deck that I'd got, and the British Museum ones, which weren't always the same. So here we can see Temperance, for example, and a version of the Hanged Man, which I'll come on to as well. You can see there's two different versions, one with a flotilla cross, the sort of reversed swastika that's used by the Nazi Party. This is the original version of it, not the reversed one that they used, and the rainbow here, and the arc above, which I'll come back to shortly. Okay, so so we published this, and then Janina Hall, an artist in Canada who I think was doing the Hecademia course with us at the time, then contacted us and said, would you like me to reproduce that deck, and then you can produce it as. We soon realized that it was actually a better opportunity for us to design our own deck and be able to really embed the spiritual aspects of our work into a majors only set of images, and not have to just slavishly recreate somebody else's intent. Now, with Waite and Krennic, their intent was to produce a sublime, mystical and ritual deck which embodies the most esoteric of teachings within Waite's inner order. And I think even from the a long study of it, it's actually a little bit incomprehensible. It's something that has to be opened up over a lot of time. So we thought what we'd do is we'd recant that into our own deck, and then we had the idea that we would do 3 decks. Then we would do an outer deck, which would be an absolute beginner's deck, a union deck, which would be a sort of more magical deck, and then an inner deck, which would be an even more profound, mystical, spiritual, sublime, etheric sort of deck for purely ritual use. But we had to start with the union deck, and for that we wanted to embody Kabbalah, we wanted to embody the Tree of Life, we wanted to embody all of these things and make it build from an outer deck, a beginner's deck, but also lead into wherever that person then wanted to explore, so that it would allow room to grow, but not immerse someone, not flood somebody with the symbolism and the images, or make it so abstract that it can't be used. I would argue that the Waite-Smith deck is a little bit like that, in that Waite really didn't leave instructions for that deck, and Pictorial Key is actually a veiled transcript of what he wanted to say, and when he did get free to say that in his FRC, his mystical order, his fraternity, it's so abstract and so specific to Waite that without a sort of master's degree in Waite speak, it's very difficult to get into, even more difficult than Pictorial Key, which at least is honest in the fact that it's not telling you anything. So we wanted to make a deck that was, as we've come to phrase it, unapologetically spiritual, but absolutely accessible. We wanted to try and marry those in the union deck to get the outer deck and the inner deck sort of married. But we had to start in the middle so that we knew what we had to do with the inner deck and with the outer deck. So hopefully those things will unfold over time. So where do we get to then? So we basically then started working on a designer for deck, and we wanted to start with the Union deck. Janine was going to do the art for that, and so 10 years later we have finished it. We didn't have to spend much time thinking about costing of it or any financial necessity for it, in the sense of we did it literally in our own time, and in Janine's case with her own materials, because we wanted to, because this is something we felt called very much to do. And so we weren't going to worry about getting it done because tarot was popular, or Kickstarter had come along, so it was a good way of funding things. All of that aside, we just wanted to spend our own time and do the deck the way we wanted to do it. And it was a bit frightening to some extent, in that you suddenly realize when you do a tarot deck that you're basically telling the world, these are the edges of your imagination. Given the fact that Janine could produce in oil painting anything that we could imagine, anything at all, no matter how abstract or how visceral or how complex, she could just produce it. So the only limit was our imagination as to what we could envisage for a deck, for these images, for the spiritual journey. So even more than a book, I hadn't realized that when you do a tarot deck, you're telling the world to some extent, this is as much as I can think of. This is the edge. These are the boundaries of my current imagination, thought, spirituality, and ability to comprehend or teach or communicate anything. So that's also why it's taken 10 years, because we wanted to be true to the edges of what we felt was possible to do. As a result, whilst we haven't managed to put camels on motorbikes within the deck, we have managed to put some camels in there. So there are some camels on the appropriate card. And hopefully the deck, in the way that it's been produced as glazed layers of oil painting, has reflected the fact that we wanted it to be multi-layered in symbolism, that you could look at it and get an image, but the more you looked at it, the more you could explore with it. There were a few other things that we also wanted to make sure that we put in it, and quite often there is a sense of having to interpret symbolism to work out what the authors or designers or artists wanted to say by it. And sometimes there isn't, particularly in the case of the Waite Smith deck, there's not really any notes from Smith as to why she put things the way she did them. We've sort of second-guessed those as best we can in Secrets of the Waite Smith Tarot, and we have reasonable evidence and Occam's razor to say you only have to say she was a theatre designer, familiar with Shakespeare, you know when and where she painted the deck. She likely used models and things from around her. She didn't use anything other than what she knew. She probably used book T because that was the only written piece of material on tarot at the time. Waite gave that to her. It was above her grade, so he never told anyone about that. He sort of makes allusions to the fact that she was somehow intuitive and could pick these things up. But looking at the deck and looking at book T, you can actually tell that she has illustrated book T of the Golden Dawn, and that is a far better guide to the Waite Smith Tarot than Waite's Pictorial Key, where he was trying to hide the fact that that's what it was based on. That's a really good hint. That's if I've only learnt one thing in 40 years of doing tarot, it's that book T is the guidebook for the Waite Smith Tarot, not Pictorial Key. So what we wanted to do was try and really record why we were doing things, what the symbolism meant, and be very explicit about that and make it very accessible. The other thing as part of that was to ensure that every symbol was utilized. So we've utilized light and darkness, we've utilized space as symbology, we've utilized perspective, we've utilized the ratio of figures in the cards, we've utilized numerology, sacred geometry, and there are layers within layers that are very deliberately designed into the deck. We've also utilized correspondences as well. And we've recorded all of that. So at some future point, there'll be a sort of big coffee table book with larger pictures and some of our sketches and so on, which we've shared as well, some of those on the Kickstarter page itself. One of the other design conceits was that for me personally, I wanted to make sure it showed the initiatory journey in the Western esoteric initiatory system without that getting in the way. And rather than overload a deck with loads of occult symbols and things that were only for the adepts to understand, the way we've done that is actually very straightforward. And I'll show you a copy of the deck from one of our draft prints of it. So here's a copy of the deck. Let me just go. So there's the High Priestess that we were talking about. And a similar form of drawing down the moon as well as in this card. These are the larger version of the deck, and they'll come in a tuck box, a card tuck box like this. Again, this is the draft, so you can see it's slightly off center. So I'm just waiting for the new one of that. I did that in a hurry just to make sure it looked okay in terms of the glossiness of the card and the images. You can see it's got a nice rose key deliberately put on the fold so that when you open it, you're opening the rose key that's also on the back of the cards as well. And that's either way as well. So that'll be the card tuck box that comes with the larger version of the deck. But what we wanted to do was we realized that we could actually build the paths into the cards without them getting in the way of anything. So here we have a set of stairs and a light coming down from what in effect is the Fool card, and coming down to wake up the Fool who is asleep at the bottom of the stairs. Okay, and then when we get to the Fool card, you can see that the Fool is holding a light, there, which is the white rose, and the bag itself that he has carried all this way is unspooling itself into the abyss down to this point of zero light here. And then that light is actually the light that then shines back through this card and wakes him up at the start of his journey. And on this card are two trees that are at the bottom of the staircase, which are carved to represent that the world is a still image of the reality that's underneath it. Because the only time we see the two trees in retrospect is on the Fool card, when he has passed in between the two cards, the two trees, and the serpent comes back down the tree of life in order to start the journey again. And so what we did was on the paths, you can see this is a slightly diagonal path going up this way. And obviously on this, we have a diagonal path that's even clearer, and that leads to the Garden of Eden with the sun and the solar sort of Christian symbolism in the center. But we've also got the animal-headed gods of ancient Egypt crowning the human consciousness that is now arising in our social and psychological development, that's represented by the sort of Christ figure or the risen king figure that's in the center of the card. But that path there is at an angle behind it. So what it means is that when you lay out all of the cards on the Tree of Life in the Waitrinic version of the layout, let me just grab a pen here as a pointer, you can see that the paths actually here and here go diagonally across the paths of the Tree of Life, and the same with the Blasted Tower and the Star card down at the bottom. Those diagonals go up the paths according to their positions on the Tree of Life. The same with the Hermit and the Death cards that lead higher up the tree after the Garden of Eden cards, which you can see here. So we've taken some of the Waitrinic versions and we've integrated them into a real Tree of Life so that this illustrates the entire journey as a journey. People talk about the Fool's Journey, but they don't illustrate it, or they illustrate it in a very abstract sort of way. So for the Union deck, we wanted to actually build the whole Tree of Life into it so that it makes it accessible. When you lay out these cards in this pattern on the Tree of Life, you can see them as paths, as journeys. And so all of a sudden, the correspondences are, for example, here we have, and this is the first time I've talked about this publicly for 10 years, by the way. Here we have the Sun. Let me just hold this here. So we have the Sun and the Devil and the Lovers in the middle here. And this is the Garden of Eden with the wall in the background, symbolizing Tiferet in the middle of the Tree of Life. Similarly, the line here, so that symbolizes the Veil of Paraketh on the tree, but you don't need to know any of that. This is the point of the deck, is that you don't need to know that just to appreciate that these cards have some sort of wall behind them, and that symbolizes something in a reading itself, which I'll come on to in a moment. Similarly, at a higher level, the Chariot and the Strength cards with the Fool card in between have a line going behind them, which is the Abyss, which is actually sort of symbolic of their position on the tree. So the full deck comes with a black and white and colour version of the Tree of Life. I'll put it up the right way, like so. And there are two versions of those cards. So you get 4 of them in total, because we have one of them that is the Waitrinic order, and one of them, one pair, colour and black and white, the same thing, which is our Order of Everlasting Day order. And the only difference is that the Fool and the High Priestess are swapped. When I originally received the original cards off eBay and tried to lay them out into the Tree of Life, I got it just about right, apart from those 2 cards, which I put on different paths. And it seemed to make absolute sense to me that Wade would have done it in a particular way. And then when we finally got to meet some of the members of the FRC, one particular member of the FRC, and discuss it with them, it turned out that I got them all right, apart from that one swap. But to me, that swap makes far more sense for all sorts of reasons. So there are 2 different versions of the layout. So you've got the Golden Dawn version, you've got Aleister Crowley's version, and you've got the Waitrinic version, and you've got the Order of Everlasting Day version, which are 4 different sets of correspondences for 4 very different sort of maps. It's a little bit like having a map of the same place, but one's a walking map, one's a driving map, one's a geographical map, and one's a map of the coffee shops. That's Crowley's version, probably. Crowley's version is more of a walking map of where the pubs are, the pubs and the brothels are, as opposed to the other maps. So, but all the same place. It just, depending on the map you use, will take you to different ways of seeing exactly the same place, which is the universe and our relationship to it. So that's the larger version that comes in the card box. We didn't want to go overboard with doing lots of mouse mats and badges and stickers and all of the other paraphernalia that come with the deck, because A, it leaves more room for things to go wrong in the production and delivery, and B, it adds to the cost, and C, it's unnecessary for what we wanted to do with this 10-year project. This was not a 10-year project to produce a mouse mat or a fancy sandwich box image. This was something entirely different. So the smaller version of the deck then comes in a tin, and this is exactly the same version of the deck, but just a regular tarot size version. So these are large. My hands are quite big, so it looks like a normal deck, but actually these are the regular size deck. You can see the rose key is now on the bottom, and herald is on the front, as it is on the back of the card box with the wheel card. This is the wheel, which is represented by an angel in our deck. And so the cards come in a tin. Now, because the tin is designed for a 78 card deck, obviously there's space in here to put a spread cloth, if you want to have a black cloth to put in there as well. And then we have the smaller version of the deck. Now, this probably won't come with these because I just test printed these, and I mean, possibly we'll print it with those in, not decided yet. They are viewable. I mean, you can see what's on them, but perhaps not as useful as the large one. But then if you only buy the small one, then you wouldn't get the layout. So, but that will be in the PDF as well. So you can see our hermit card, you can see how clear the path is on it, and we wanted the hermit to not be visible. Again, when people talk about the hermit, they talk about being solitary, but you can see the hermit. He's got a lamp, everyone can see him. So we wanted a hermit that is just the symbol of the red tent for all sorts of reasons, and not be viewable on the card itself. Similarly, when people talk about the blasted tower, they often talk about the fact it's clearing the ground. It's good because it's a new beginning. So again, we wanted to symbolize that. This is a very appropriate card given the politics of the current time. We base this card on the two towers idea, that as one tower is destroyed, another tower of light always arises in response to that. But sometimes it's a sort of what's the word? It's I was going to say a causal event, but yeah, for every down there's always an up, I guess is the simple way of saying it. And here we can see the adept is actually taking a red rose from the garden of the material world as an offering to the angels on the ascending tower. Of course, the adept doesn't realize at this point, or the zealotor, that their rose is just going to be burnt away because of the blasted tower effect, and the angels have no use of the roses of that garden. They have their own garden all to themselves, and that then becomes the white rose that is on the full card that we see once all of the material attachments have been burnt away. So there's a lot of symbolism in terms of the Western East history system in this deck, but it is not necessary. Again, we wanted it to be unapologetically spiritual, but absolutely accessible. We've spent 10 years trying to design it so that it would accomplish those things. Okay, just a couple of practical things then with the deck, and then I'll be open to any questions, any specific questions. The larger deck, now not believe, or you may believe, postage and shipping costs and delivery times and so on are absolutely bonkers. They got bad before the pandemic, they'd all gone up, but since the pandemic, it's sorry, it's just coming up with a weird message. It's got worse. If this freezes in a second, then we'll finish here and now, and then I'll answer any questions in text over the coming days. So we have this project for 30 days. It's a Kickstarter. We need to raise at least £6,500. Margin, but if we don't get the 6,500, then we can't order enough. The next jump to order less decks is almost double the cost. So I wonder if it's gone offline again or back on. And there might have been a bit of a hiatus there. Yeah, so how we priced it is that we've taken into account the bare minimum that we need to produce the deck at an affordable rate. If we don't meet that minimum, then if there's not enough interest, then we're going to have to privately produce just a few of them, and that's going to be inordinately expensive for that. Hopefully, Debbie, the video will come back. Hopefully. So we've costed it at £28 for the regular deck, and £45 for the larger deck, and that includes obviously the tin or the box. And then we've set a reward for £66, which is for both of them, and that's sort of a 10% saving on the total cost of them separately. We say we need to raise £6,500. That's roughly about 100 people, and that's because we need to order at least 100 of them to get the price down to what we can afford and what we feel reasonable to charge people for a deck. And if we don't do that, then we'll have to do it privately, and probably only for members of the order, and that would be an awful shame, because it would make it impossible for a lot of people to buy it, because it would be too expensive unless you were really, really committed to utilising the cards as part of your magical spiritual work. So okay, so it's already over 2,100. We have got some contacts with a couple of the people who have done a sort of £1 million tarot Kickstarters recently. Again, very different sorts of decks. One's an animated tarot that someone did, a company did for Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy role-playing use. And they threw in that they did spell cards for the spells that you use in the game, little animated ones, that when you move them up and down they animate slightly because they've got 2 layers on them, so it's like a holographic effect. And they did a tarot deck while they were at it, and that was the first tarot project to raise over $1 million. And then the Alleyman's Tarot, which is a thrown together tarot. I don't even think you could call it a tarot. It's a thrown together collection of cards from lots of different decks, and there's about 120 of them, and that raised certainly over $1 million as well. We've been in touch with both those over time because we were backing both of them, and hopefully they're going to share our project as well with their backers, and there might be interest in the sort of I guess, the gamer end of the market and the sort of avant-garde casual end of the market in our very specific project. So if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. There's a frequently asked questions that I'm going to put up. You can't put that up onto Kickstarter until your project goes live for obvious reasons, because there's no one to ask any questions about the project if they've not seen it. So I've got a few questions I've already got answers to that I'll put on frequently asked questions off the deck. Hopefully, if you back it, you will find that we have poured 10 years of work into this, and it will give you at least 10 years of discovery. The guidebook will be a PDF. We've already started work on that. We've got hundreds of pages of notes for every single card, and we're boiling that down to a PDF that will come out with the deck, or even before the deck gets into people's hands at the hopefully successful conclusion of the Kickstarter. And that will have some quite unique things in it, ways of using the deck for spiritual and magical work, as well as divination. One of the frequently asked questions that I'm anticipating that will go into the frequently asked questions section is can you use it for everyday divination? And the answer is absolutely yes. There are a lot of really good ways that you can use this deck for everyday questions, like, will I get this job? How best can I approach this interview for a job? When will Dwayne come back to me? The everyday sort of questions. It will cope with those more than adequately, as we hope to demonstrate in the little white book that will come with the deck. I'm also going to do a live video with all of the successful backers of the deck once the campaign has finished, where I'll again take questions. We can discuss the deck. We'll have sent out the guidebook for that by then, so people will be able to get to grips with the deck really, really quickly. Because we wanted to make it, unapologetically spiritual, sublime, as mystical as we could possibly make it, while still making it absolutely accessible to anyone, whether they want to use it for everyday questions or follow it further. We wanted to make sure there was a lot of room in the deck, lots of layers that people can grow into, and that the deck itself will hold your hand through the journey. It will tell you of the highs and lows of the journey, the challenges, the traps, the obstacles, the rewards of the journey in the cards themselves. So if so it acts as a legacy, as a magical legacy of the teaching work that I'm particularly personally involved in doing with the Western esoteric industry system. So yes, there will be a guidebook, and over time, one of the immediate things we want to do is once the deck is hopefully kickstarted, then we offer poster-sized versions, a source where people can get poster-sized versions for ritual use, contemplation, just because the images are sublime pieces of art by Janine Hall herself. There's at least 3 of those cards I want as large pictures on my wall anyway, so we're hoping to be able to provide a source for those as well when we're done. The link, you can actually do that from the Kickstarter page itself. There's a little share button that will give you the link or allow you to Facebook share it and so on. All of the usual social media platforms are available there. And yeah, I mean, I'd be very grateful. Obviously, the more it's shared, the more people get to find out about it. Hopefully, the sooner it will be successfully kickstarted. So are there any other questions? And we've got 30 days as well. After 10 years, we're now down to 30 days of campaigning to try and get it published. So for us it feels, I guess, a little bit weird because, and there's several folk here with us now and who probably remember when we first announced it 10 years ago. So it has been a long journey, and I thank everyone for their patience. We're hoping, and this is in the frequently asked questions, that the outer deck, who we have an artist potentially lined up for, we've got an artist potentially lined up for the inner deck as well, that they will not take 10 years each. If they take 10 years each, that's just the way of it. But we're hoping the outer deck, which we've refused to work on until we've got this deck sorted, will be a lot faster because we've already sorted a lot of the design work out for both the inner and the outer deck in doing the union deck, which was another reason we wanted to do this one first. This is the linchpin, so we had to already do the work for the inner deck and the outer deck first. So we've got a big head start on those. Yeah, it is amazing. I mean, you know, the amount of hours that have gone into this over the last 10 years, thousands and thousands of hours have gone into this piece of work. And yeah, it was very weird to actually sort of hold it as a physical deck. It was like, oh, well, why did that take 10 years to do? It's only 22 images. It's very straightforward. So yeah, but it's well, I don't know about Tali and Janine, but I'm certainly very proud of it. I'm very pleased with the fact we've managed to finish it over such a long period of time. I couldn't have asked for a better artist than Janine to realise some of the images. My favourite card, I guess, just to finish up with, for all sorts of reasons, is our version of the, actually they're all my favourite card, but and I love them all for very different reasons. But I've grown to like the Temperance card just because it's such a gorgeous image, and it's sort of multi-layered in its alchemical symbolism as well, whilst not being really complicated with thousands of different alchemical pieces of equipment all over it. And I love this card as well, which is our version of the Hanged Man. This isn't as different to the Hanged Man as people might think. The Golden Dawn and Trinic and Waite all used a very different sort of Hanged Man. They used the Hanged Man to symbolize the divine in the everyday. They used it in symbolism as the drowned divine. So they had an ark floating above an ocean in which was a drowned giant to represent the divine that is submerged into our everyday, that suffuses our everyday life. So what we wanted to do was symbolize this with the path between, let me get this right, between Hod and Gibora. So this is Gibora up at the top, and it is an ark on the top of the mountain that is flooding from within. So the ark is not holding the flood or being borne up on the flood. It is actually flooding from within by all of the life that is above it. And as the ark is flooding, an angel is trying to get to it, and we call this the last angel. And the angel is carrying its own wings because they've been torn off it in order to get to the ark. And the blood from the angel's wings are forming roses on the path. And those roses are the very roses that are picked by the Zelator when they start off on their journey. And that is where your spirituality comes from, is the blood of your own angel setting the course above you. So we have tried to layer a lot of our teaching into this deck and make it, say, unapologetically spiritual and absolutely accessible just by the pictures themselves. Okay, so thank you for your time and attention, your patience, and for some of you over the last 10 years while we got this project done. We've got 30 days left to get it funded and get it printed, and then we can get to use it, because I've already found ways of using it that I didn't expect, that have just come from the artwork itself and having it in my hands. So thanks a lot for all of your time, support, attention and everything, and interest in this work. It isn't, say, we are not in the business of producing tarot flavored ice cream or tarot design mouse mats or anything like that. That's not really our true business. This is as close to our real business as we can possibly express at the moment, and that's what we welcome you to, invite you to, and encourage you to by supporting the deck itself. So thanks a lot for your time and attention and spending time here, and thank you. So we'll talk in the Facebook group over the next few days, I'm sure, and I look forward to answering any questions that you have on Facebook. That'd be great. Thanks a lot. Oh, and you can see every single card. There is a animation of all 22 cards on the Kickstarter page itself. We might sneak in a few rewards. Hello, Ileana. Thank you for attending. We might sneak in a few extra rewards along the way. We will have to think about that depending on how the project and the campaign goes. Okay, so thanks a lot for your time and attention. There was one other thing I was going to say, but it's entirely escaped me. Okay, thanks a lot for your time and attention. Oh yes, that's right. Every card is illustrated, so we have finished. This is another difference with this and other Kickstarters. We finished the deck, we've got it printed as a draft and so on. We're happy with the box and the tin and so on. We don't have to wait for any of those things. The moment Kickstarter release the funds to us, minus taking all of their fees, you'll see a timeline on the Kickstarter. We hope to get it into people's hands by late November, early December, just before Christmas, just before the winter solstice. We intend, if the project is funded, that you will have this in your hands. We'll have it in our hands before the winter solstice. So, and that would be dead on 10 years from the moment Janine first contacted us. It will be a 10-year, literally to the day, project of these 22 cards. So thanks a lot for your time, and I'll answer any questions in Facebook over the coming days. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.